Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the place that you come when you want your life to be lower friction than it was before you came here. Let's get into today. So I will be really ripping through today's video, which will be a quick one on the detail review for Boeshield T9 lubricant. Yes, apologies, not even time today for some just general fun low friction updates on stuff. My awesome retail manager Andrew has taken this week off to spend more time on his awesomely low friction bikes, so that's hopefully been a super week. But yeah, it's just meant I've been sort of more all hands on deck on taking care of all the retail side as well as the other stuff. So running out of time on this Friday, let's get into Boeshield T9 and see how this went. Okay, first step, let's have a look at the marketing claims. This is direct from the Boeshield website. In the bike section, so Boeshield T9 is a bicyclist's best friend, waterproof your bike chain, lubricate cables and prevent rust with our effective all-in-one formula. Works in both wet and dry conditions. In the world of cycling, few terrains are off limits and endurance is essential for both rider and equipment. A tough, long-lasting waterproof lubricant is crucial for safety and performance. Safety, hey? Whether you're navigating dusty mountain trails or zipping along highways, wet, dry or in dirt, serious cyclists rely on one product to clean, lubricate and protect. Boeshield T9 does it all. So this is sounding a little bit reminiscent of the rather magnificent Presticycle 1 lubricant that we reviewed recently. Obviously saying that a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Unlike Presticycle 1 though, this one does look a little better, and I didn't have to check for a pregnancy warning label on the bottle like I did with the Presticycle 1 lube. Alright, T9 flushes out dirt and old lubricants. It displaces moisture and penetrates moving parts in between the rollers and pins on drivetrains, carrying the paraffin formula deep into these areas and coating them thoroughly. T9 dries to a clean, continuous wax film that performs better than Teflon and lasts up to 200 miles without picking up dust, dirt or mud. Use T9 on drive chains, derailleurs, control cables, brake cables, shift cables, caliper pivots, pedal pivots, seat posts, spoke nipples and inside frames. Reaches deeper. T9 stays liquid long enough to permeate metal crevices and seep deep inside its assembled components to leave a durable protective coating that lubricates and protects, all without dismantling your equipment. That would be handy. We would not want to have to dismantle our chains to lubricate them. That would be a whole bunch of fun. Completely waterproof, T9 dries to a clean, waxy waterproof film that won't wash off in rain, puddles or mud. You can rinse away sand, dust and grime with water while leaving the lubricant intact. One step to long-term protection: apply T9 to any metal surface and let it dry. One simple step gives you a thin, penetrating film of durable waterproof protection and lubrication that endures month after month, mile after mile. Alrighty, so mostly this, I guess, the sort of general claims that you're going to get for a lot of lubricants. So there's nothing really too outlandish there, although it's sort of claiming that it does a whole bunch of stuff. That is normal. So yeah, nothing really of concern with the claims. I'll just speak to one particular one though in a little bit more depth before we dig into the actual review. Okay, so yeah, Boeshield T9, like, it seems to be, according to I guess the claims, kind of something in between like what you would traditionally think of with a wax drip lubricant or a wet lubricant. So it is apparently leaving behind a paraffin wax after its carrier has evaporated. However, I found from observation was that really it still acts like a wet lube, so it may be, I guess, leaving behind a paraffin lubricant as its main lubricant base that it wants to leave behind after X amount of the carrier evaporates. However, I found that it certainly doesn't go truly dry. It stays, not really wet like proper wet lubricants as such, but it's definitely, I wouldn't class it as a dry lubricant either. So it's really kind of a bit in between, but overall it's definitely acting more towards the wet side of things. For this particular test, so Boeshield do a couple of versions. They do have a drip version, and they also have an aerosol version. I tested the aerosol version simply because I haven't tested an aerosol lubricant yet, and overall I'd been asked about Boeshield over the years by quite a number of people, so it was time to sort of, if I was going to put an aerosol to the test, then Boeshield T9 seemed like a really good one to sort of check out. So that is how we arrived at that one. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about aerosol. Okay, the reason why an aerosol lubricant for bicycle chains has taken a while to get, I guess, featured or tested is that for me they've always been a bit of a logic fail. Your bicycle chain is pretty thin, even if it's an older sort of thicker speed. It is basically guaranteed, even if you're using the included little hose things that they give you. Here's some pics from different brands because I couldn't find any pics from Boeshield itself, but this is what will happen. Absolutely guaranteed, you will spray a lot of lubricant elsewhere other than your chain. So, if you're a fan of your bicycle chain lubricant also going to lubricate your floor, your tire, your wheel rim, and a whole bunch of other stuff that might be in the vicinity, then it's not a very efficient way to go, as opposed to, for instance, you can see here in the picture with back to the T9 again, they do a drip version, putting 1 drop per roller. That's a great way to go. The aerosols also cost more to manufacture. It's just a fact of life. Obviously, it is going to cost more to make an aerosol version of the drip there. So you're, at the end of the day, you're paying extra to have a method of lubricating a whole bunch of things that you don't want to lubricate, outside of your chain. So it's never made a lot of sense to me at all. So I've always tended to steer clear of the aerosols. There can be a potential case to be sort of, I guess, called with regards to, will the aerosol spray, will that blast a little bit more crap out as opposed to just putting 1 drop per roller on? Potentially yes, but again, for me it's just not a very efficient way of going about chain maintenance. If I'm needing to maintain my chain, really, how often, and is going to depend on what my lubricant performance is in the conditions that I tend to ride in, obviously. If I'm doing it on bike, I'm going to look for a proper, cleaning spray, as opposed to trying to use my not that cheap lubricant as an aerosol to flush clean my chain, and in the process, spray it around all other places other than my chain. So, yeah, if you're really, really time poor, and it's kind of like, look, I just want to blast my chain and blast whatever crap comes out and lubricate it, and then I'll wipe the excess, and just having that sort of potential little bit extra 2-in-1 approach, that if that suits you, then don't let me tell you otherwise. But yeah, just not an approach I think that suits the majority. The majority should look to much more efficiently put a drop per roller of their lubricant on, and then have a more dedicated path for chain maintenance as required. Alright, post that mini tangent, circling back to the marketing claim I said I was going to talk a little bit more about just before we got into the review. And that really is this one. So, completely waterproof, once dry, Boeshield T9 will not wash off in rain or mud. So I mean, overall, the marketing claims that Boeshield are making are not outrageous at all. Just the one the not coming off in the mud is, I guess, the main one that stands out, simply because at the end of the day, if you're riding out, off-road in the mud, the water plus mud, it's going to just be a whole lot of contamination that's quite abrasive, brought right into your chain. The pressures inside are just extremely high. No lubricant is immune to that. It will be abraded off, like every other lubricant is abraded off. Yes, there will be a difference in, X will last longer than Y. So from the the lowest performers out there versus the best performers, definitely there will be a difference with regards to how products perform in the mud. But you just can't make an open-ended claim that you're going to be able to go out in the mud and you're fine. Depending on the mud and a whole bunch of other things, there is going to be quite a finite time limit with regards to how long things are going to be fine. And as we saw really at the Unbound this year, wouldn't matter what your plan was with your chain lubrication going into that horrendous section that they hit quite early on. Nobody's chain got through that and was then okay. Probably nobody's chain made it even 20% through that section and was then going to be okay. All of them needed pretty severe attention, if possible, after that section, or they're just riding with horrendous things going on with their chain and their friction and wear. So yeah, you can't, that's really the only one that sort of stands out from the marketing claims wise, is look, that's just pretty off base. It will not, neither will anything else. How it will go versus other stuff, let's have a bit of a look. Okay, Zero Friction Cycling is very excited and pleased to present to you Excel graphs. Yeehaw. Alrighty, Boeshield T9 in clean block 1, which has no contamination. It's really up to the lubricant because the chain's perfectly cleaned. Clean block 1 is really where we see if there are any initial penetration issues, which is most prevalent for wax strip lubricants and should not be an issue or a concern for all other types of lubricants being applied, especially so an aerosol lubricant. Now, Boeshield do claim that they are, I guess, you spray it on, wipe the excess, it will quickly dry and leave behind a paraffin film. That was not really my observation. Even after thoroughly wiping excess and giving it, many hours of drying time, it still remains quite wet. Not as wet as the more wet drip lubricants, but definitely not what I would class as a dry lubricant either. So it's kind of this sort of funny one in a little bit in between. So, but suffice to say, it shouldn't have any penetration issues. 11.1%, that is not terrible. It's certainly not amazing, but it's not, I guess, bad. So against all wet lubricants tested at 16.7%, so it's sort of around 30% lower than the average of all wet lubricants tested. But bear in mind, in that are some pretty horrendous ones bringing that figure up. The average of all wax strip lubricants is very similar to that, so some of the wax strips though have had penetration issues, bringing up that result in block 1. Against the top 5 wet lubricants tested, it's about, sort of almost 5 times higher wear than the top wet lubricants on the league table to date, so it's a fair bit behind the pointy end of town. And it's a sort of double the wear of the top 5 wax drip lubricants that we've tested to date. But pleasingly, miles away from the 5 worst wet lubricants ever tested, which are pretty horrendous. Okay, moving on to block 2, where we are adding some abrasive dry contamination. And again, this is where, really the Boeshield not being as dry as what the marketing would sort of have you convinced of. It did soak up a fair bit more than I was hoping, and it didn't really, I guess, flush out as much in the respraying application as I was hoping either. So again, not a disaster, but not brilliant either. So 32.3%. The average of all wet lubricants tested to date is 46.7. Again, that's a number that is sort of dragged up by some really horrendous performers. Against the top, please forgive me on this Friday afternoon, against the average of all wax strip lubricants, they're at 9.5%. So this is where the wax strip lubricants really start to show their contamination resistance. All right, against the top 5 wet lubricants, they're at 16.6. So it's basically double the wear rate of the top 5 wet lubricants that we've tested. Against the top 5 wax strip lubricants, it's basically nearly 10 times higher, so it's a fair way off there. So again, if you're riding off-road in the world of dirt and dust, you can get a lot lower wear rate and a lot easier maintenance time by going with a proven top wax strip lubricant or immersive wax as opposed to the Boeshield T9. But again, it is smashing the 5 worst wet lubricants that we've ever tested, so it's got that going for it. So yeah, again, not a terrible result, but certainly nothing to write home to your mum about. It's not really kicking goals there, as I was hoping it might do a bit better. Okay, skipping to the wet contamination block 4. There's not much point covering block 3 on this one. It was okay. Alrighty, T9 at 47.4%. Against all wet lubricants tested at 66.6. Again, it is above average compared to all the wet combined. against the average of all the wax drip lubricants, it's not terribly far behind. So again, the wax drip lubricants can have, not the greatest amount of ability to clear the contamination that's brought in during this block. So they were at 37.7 versus Boeshield T9's 47.4. The top 5 wet lubricants tested are at 36.9%, so that's a much closer gap overall. All of these products are really struggling in this pretty harsh block. The top 5 wax strip lubricants at 33%, and the worst 5 lubricants tested to date at 100.9%. So again, that's just for that 1,000 kilometer block. So again, it's sort of trending, it's not jumping to and fro with one particular sort of test block to another. It's held pretty well around a particular spot against the others. So, not bad, not great. You could do worse, you can do better. That's mostly the story of the Boeshield T9. Last one, so having a look at the main test through to the end of block 5, which is what I used to calculate the cost to run modelling on. Sorry, just reduce that down a little. So total wear by the end of the main test at 150.5%. Average of all wet lubricants at 227.2%. So again, nicely ahead of the average. Average of all the wax strip lubricants at 90.2%. Average of the top 5 wet lubricants tested is 124.6%. So again, it's not terribly far off the top 5 there. So that's not bad overall. Average of the top 5 wax strip lubricants at 67.9%, so about sort of 2.5 times off the top 5 wax. And the 5 worst lubricants we tested are putting in a pretty impressive number there at 377 odd percent. So smashing that one. We'll have a quick look at the main data table just for fun. Okay, so we can sort of see if I sort by. Sorry, that was the cumulative. Block by block. Okay, so Boeshield T9. It's kind of, so comparing to wet lubricants, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, sort of 10th place against wet lubricants in block 1. So not amazing. In block 2, what are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So quite similar. So I did want to have a look at just block 3. So this is, does the spray enable it to sort of clear more crap after block 2 than just the drip on lubricants? And a little. So it's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, your aerosol spray is not really giving you this sort of much greater clearance or flushing out the crap that was absorbed in through block 2, not to the extent that I really thought that it might. So there's not a big case there for that, paying that extra for your aerosol. And then in the wet contamination, it's sort of sitting back around similar place, a little bit better there at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th place. So pretty much ranking between 7th and 10th out of wet lubricants tested, and really sort of down, averaging around the low 20s total placings out of sort of about nearly 40 lubricants tested. So that's where she is, pretty mid-pack. And lastly, quick flick over to the cost to run modelling. A few less lubricants modelled all up because some just too extrapolated data to actually model. So modelling for Durace components off the 5,000 kilometre main test. It's sort of 19th out of 34 tested, so again pretty mid-pack. 20th out of 34 when we are looking at dry off-road conditions, and 17th out of 34 looking in the wet block 4 type conditions. So again, very mid-pack, matching the wear rates there, and there's nothing too crazy about the actual lubricant cost itself overall. So again, that's kind of where she is. Okay, so I'm going to circle that all back to this. I guess one of the main claims really is to what sucks people in, not sucks people in, that's the wrong word, entices people in to purchase Boeshield T9. that it was developed and licensed by the Boeing company to fill their need for a superior lubricant protectant of aircraft components, as extensive research proved that none of the Teflon, silicon, or synthetic lubricants held up when exposed to wet and dirty environments. Now, for number one, there's still this draw. Anything that is assigned to aircraft or aerospace, there is always this draw that if it's good enough for that, then it has to be amazing and will just absolutely kick butt in the land of bicycles, because bicycles are going to be doing so much easier stuff than whatever it was designed for an aircraft or a spacecraft. So, and often that can be a bit of a misconception. Obviously, like a lubricant is generally designed for a pretty specific use case. I do not know what aircraft part this was designed for that was exposed to wet and dirty environments. But on a bicycle chain, against the type of environment it's exposed to in the zero friction cycling test, it wasn't terrible, but it certainly is nowhere near a match for the top lubricants tested, not even really the top wet lubricants tested. So, I would say perhaps Boeing could purchase some other products and be way happier than with their own T9. Last but not least, here are a couple of pics from the how things looked at the end of the test. This is at the end of block 4. I did stop the test at the end of block 4. It had extrapolated data for block 5 because it had exceeded the wear allowance by the end of block 4, which is the wet contamination block. Things don't look amazing. So again, after each application, I did do my best to wipe excess and wipe the chain clean. And even still, it sort of ended up like that. You can see on the chainring that, it's not really looking like that sort of, I guess, more wet lube type. It is a bit waxy. And you can see more of a sort of waxy build-up. But it certainly isn't really like a wax strip either. And on the cassette, you can just see all the grit there that's stuck in. It's not amazing by this point. So, I have seen better looking chains and components at this point in the test than this one, and again, that's with my darndest trying to keep it as clean as possible by following their instructions as best as possible. And not what I would want to go out and ride on. Alright, summary and conclusion for Boeshield T9. And apologies for losing the ability to speak. I'm fried, so I'm pretty much done. It's not something that I personally would buy, nor recommend. Again, it is far from terrible. It's sort of sitting smack in the middle over on the league table and cost to run and so on, and that's pretty much across most of the different test blocks. So be it dry contamination, wet. It's not terrible, but it's certainly a long way from the top products that we found. So it's a fair way from the recommend list. I do know from just interactions over the years that many that have written in requesting that this one be tested have overall been very happy with it. And I think, especially if you've got the drip version, which is going to make it a bit easier to keep clean. You could see from the pics overall, things have got pretty messy by that point. And again, it's just so hard to control that excess when you're spraying it on. So you do end up with too much, even with wiping, doing best on the chain, but you still get all that crap everywhere as well. So just not amazing. I think the little drip bottle would do you better. But yeah, I do know that people that have been using Boeshield T9, I guess they've sort of bought into the marketing. That if you buy into the marketing, that does help your experience be happy, because in your mind you're expecting to be happy and you're expecting that it's doing all these wonderful things that the marketing is telling you that it's doing. So that kind of mental image, I guess, that you get does lead to a certain bias in your experience, and that's what we see all the time with obviously media reviews. Too often, as you would know, with media reviews, they get a product from a company, a whole bunch of marketing fluff from the company about all the wondrous things that it is going to do, and they go out and test it, and in their mind it is doing all the wondrous things that they were told it was going to do from the marketing. So there will be, I think, a bit of that. It could also be that what they were using before, could well have been a lot worse than T9. There are a heck of a lot worse out there than T9. The lubricants at the bottom end of the league table, which some of them are pretty, I guess, commonly stocked in your local bike store and commonly pushed from local bike stores, and are just horrendous stuff. So if that was your previous experience and then you went to T9, T9 would seem amazing. However, that same sort of gap you would see again, I think, if you went from T9 to one of the top 5 sort of lubricants tested, even in the wet lubricant space. Or if you're obviously on the off-road, then really consider one of the top 5 in the wax lubricant spaces or the immersive wax, and your little low friction world will be fairly well rocked, and you'll be having grand old times. All right, I will stop here because I'm going to completely lose the power of any coherent speech, and it will be even more of a rambling mess than I normally do. Thanks for watching. Hope you found the review of T9 sort of interesting and informative if you're using it or were considering using it, or just in general. And yeah, have a great weekend of cycling, and I will catch you next Friday for what should be the next sort of little deep dive low friction topic, and I will allow myself to have more time on that one. Again, yeah, this week was a bit of a killer. I should be less fried next Friday, and I'll start earlier. Okay, catch you on the next one.